Warning: the following video contains explicit language which may be offensive to some viewers or inappropriate for children. The content within this video is intended for mature audiences only.
Warning: this video will contain spoilers for the Doom Patrol, both the comics and the TV show. This video may contain discussions of drug use, violence, and sexual situations. Viewing beyond this point is done at your own risk. I take no responsibility for your decision. Thank you, and please have a nice day.
Hello and welcome to this video. This is part 2 on the Doom Patrol. As I was saying, the Morrison's creation of Crazy Jane allowed for the two to be able to do stories on mental health, LGBTQ plus issues, and just, allowed for this creative flow. And it had to be creative because of the standards that we had back then were much more conservative than they are now in some ways, and a lot more liberal in others. But the telling of stories that involved sexuality, gender, orientation, stuff like that, race, all had to be camouflage. The X-Men did a better job faster. They just had better writers. They had better stories. But the X-Men did the same thing. They allowed for stories to be told that otherwise couldn't have been told, because you have the this is a comic and this is a pretend fantasy thing, but now that we've gotten into a more liberal, like I said, in some ways more conservative in others, that where you can openly have these stories in TV, movies, podcasts. I would say radio shows, but podcasts basically replace those. And it's these characters that they do this. Like I said, characters came in and out. And a TV show, you had the introduction of Cyborg, which was kind of interesting because that was the first time that had been done, and it was well done. I liked it. It wasn't expected, but I did like it. It was different, but you had characters. Beast Boy who later became a Teen Titan. In the show, Madame Rouge, and the brain is drawing a blank just now. But your main cast, I said this last video, or the cast that we're going to focus on, because it was in the show and it made the show work, and because this particular team up originated, well, no, not exactly. You'd have to read the more. We'll get into that here in a little bit. There's the team we're going to be looking at is Negative Man, Elastigirl, Robot Man, Crazy Jane, in Dorothy. Dorothy in the TV show was the daughter of the chief, who I forgot, he chief. DC Comics Professor Xavier, basically. Minus the telepathy, but the mass intelligence chief had the mass intelligence and all that good stuff, just not the psychic powers that Xavier had. So, in the show, Dorothy is his daughter. And Dorothy is a Grant, like Crazy Jane, is a Grant Morrison addition to the lore. Morrison also introduced Danny the Street, who shows up in the show, and that was something that I wouldn't have expected to be allowed to be broadcast, even on a streaming service, just because of the history and the lore behind Danny the Street. But at the same time, it didn't surprise me, like, oh, it was like, I wouldn't have figured that, but yeah, makes sense. It's because Danny falls in that gray area, because it's a street, but it's a genderqueer street, sentient, and it travels around. It teleports. It's magical. It's whatever comic book logic you need, and it has these amazing abilities, and at one point he evolves into a sentient world of its own, and Crazy Jane goes there to live with Casey, Space Case, who's a character who was with the Doom Patrol for a little while. She was a fictional comic book character that was willed into reality in the show. In the comics, she's an ambulance driver, if I remember correctly, and winds up somehow driving Danny. When Danny gets in a separate comic outside of Doom Patrol, he gets exploded and basically has to rebuild himself. He started as a brick, so at this point Danny was an ambulance, but that is, you have Danny the Street is something you almost have to read the comics to fully grasp hold of. They go on adventures. They fight, like I was saying in Lesser. They fight they're the B-class. They're the benchwarmer heroes, so they fight the benchwarmer villains. There's one series that I really like in Morrison's run, in which they go the bad guys, the brotherhood in the comics, it's Brotherhood of Dada, and in the show they did a really, really good Sisterhood of the Dada, and that was well done in the show. But in the comics, they steal out of a museum Dr. Albert Hoffman's bicycle, and in the lore, so the comic can happen, the writer, when the writer can magically have it basically produce euphoria and hallucinations and stuff, and they use it. They use it basically. Negative Man, who's not in the Sister Dada, because, well, it's Sisterhood, but he in the comics, he is, or Mr. Nobody, not Negative Man, Mr. Nobody. Mr. Nobody, I'm sorry because I said him the entire last video, but Mr. Nobody is running for president, and he's using the Dr. Albert Hoffman's bike, the bike that he rode on his famous 419 bike ride, bicycle day. But the Hoffman's bicycle, and basically the Doom Patrol got to stop him. And I think Crazy Jane is the only one not affected by it, because of the multiple it affect one personality, and that personality would get recessed, and a sober personality would come in, and she had 63 of them, or 63 known personalities, and so yeah, and she could have, so I think because of so many personalities, she's the reason why they get everything quelled. But it's just a fun episode, and that's a lot of them. They have Morrison arcs through his entire run, and goes, and has a big overarching story. You have little stories that build the arc, that build his story arc. You have the little stories that are the stones and the keystones, and you have the key stories, and you have the key stories going in where the keystones on a bridge would, and it flows. I think it was 4 or 5 years he did it. Like I said, it's 3.5-inch omnibus now, so you know how thin a issue of the comic was in the 80s, those of us who were around in the 80s. So yeah, it's interesting. There are things, but there is, at the end of the story, or at the end of the mini arcs within the arcs within arcs within arcs type thing, you would have bad guys. You would have a little bit kind of like a video game. You start out, you have your low-level bosses, and your mid-level bosses, and your big boss, then your final boss. Kind of like that. That's kind of how Morrison's is done, and it's cool. There's a story in which we find out the chief isn't above board about everything that he's doing and done. Larry Trainer becomes a dual or a tri-personality. The negative spirit basically combines Larry Trainer and a nurse. I can't remember the nurse, or doctor, female doctor. Larry Trainer was gay, she was straight, and merges into this this trinity entity, gets pregnant, has birth. That never happened. They kind of alluded to it in the show. They kind of had to tone that one back, because in the context of the comic book, you have space and aliens and all that, and they didn't have the budget for it. I'll be honest with you, that would be expensive to do. If they were to try to do a panel by panel translation from Morrison's work to that, the budget for that would go through the roof. Elastigirl becomes kind of like a celestial thing, a spirit, kind of when Jean Grey, Jean Grey becomes Fire Phoenix or Phoenix Fire. I can't remember exactly her supernatural self. But Elastigirl doesn't go psycho killer crazy or anything. So, and that matter of fact, that is the only way she appears in Morrison's run. I always found that interesting. And the team of Crazy Jane and Cliff were just both in the show and in the comic. They did it well. Brendan Fraser, he was the voice of Rocket Man. There's another actor who was the actual physical body of Cliff or Rocket Man. Let me see. Yeah, Riley Shanahan. Riley Shanahan was the guy in the costume, and Brendan Fraser was the voice. And Brendan Fraser did all the flashbacks and stuff as Cliff Steele. I have to give it to Diane Guerrero as Crazy Jane, because when the show or the story called for it and she had to change personalities, just boom, 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 she did it. When Crazy Jane, she was cast as Crazy Jane. And when Crazy Jane started spinning through the channels or things like that, Diane Guerrero nailed it. She could seamlessly from personality to personality, and she hit the personalities, whether they were extreme opposites of each other. And of all the actors and actresses, and they all did a damn good job. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, the portrayal of Crazy Jane was just, had to have been the hardest role to A, write for, and B, put in action. So yeah, she hit it out of the park. Did a damn good job. Like I said, there are the shows with Madame Rouge. Missy Gomez played Madame Rouge, who wasn't in the comics, but she was made up for the show. And Missy and the other members of the Dada from the comic ported over. Instead of having Mr. Nobody as the head, they had Madame Rouge. And Missy Gomez played it to the just her and Rita Farr. Let me check my notes real quick. April Balby, Rita Farr, played by April Balby. Those two playing off each other was just as powerful and just as well written as the Crazy Jane and Cliff bouncing off each other. It was just one of those great things, and I would really, really recommend checking out the Grant Morrison comics or the TV show if you got the HBO Max or whatever they're calling it this week. I would highly recommend watching it. It's well done. It's very, very close to the comics without being a panel to panel. It is a worthy translation. It is an honorable translation, unlike other things where they drift from the source material. Like I said, great, wonderful show and comic. So Until next time, be a good human. Be good to other humans. Peace.
Hey, it's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?